want to thank everybody who is on the call right now. We're doing this via multiple platforms, so it's something new we're trying with our current increased spike of technology knowledge. So we want to welcome everybody for being part of this call. We have around 400 people that have registered for this, so that says that obviously it's a topic that everyone's wondering about, and we want to be able to hopefully provide you with some answers. On behalf of the Campfire Conference, we want to help all of our colleagues out there across the movement. For those that aren't aware, the Campfire Conference is an annual conference held at Blue Ridge, North Carolina, every January, where we bring together all of our camp professionals, and it's a great time for networking and learning. And I think that through those networks is kind of what has brought us here today to talk about specifically day camp. I know there's been some stuff coming out about resident camp, but we want to offer you guys some things to start thinking about day camp. Joining me on the call, my name is Chuck, by the way, Steinfurth. I'm the executive of after school programs at the First Coast YMCA in Florida. Joining me on the call are two friends, Rhonda Elmore from the Birmingham YMCA and Julie Hollister from the Greenville YMCA, South Carolina. I'm excited to have everybody part of this call. I'm going to talk a little bit about our expectations and kind of some of the things that we hope to accomplish. So first and foremost, I will say that a lot of the slides you're going to see are going to have a question mark on them, which means our goal here is to, if you have not started to think about this, is give you the right questions to start asking. We know that everybody has a million questions right now. We want to make sure that you're all asking the right ones. Or if you're really just starting to wrap your head around what is summer camp going to be, how's it going to look different? Are we going to have summer camp? We're going to give you those questions to ask. So hopefully you can take these questions, sort of personalize them to your YMCA or to your town, to your state, and figure out how you can answer some of those questions so you can start coming up with a contingency plan in that area. I will say that there's still some work being developed. So within the next couple of weeks, we can expect to see something coming out from the YMCA of the USA. So there'll be a document that gives some support and resources to a lot of the questions that we're going to be posing today. We are still waiting to hear some guidance from the CDC, from ACA, and obviously anything that your state says we don't want to make sure that we're superseding that. So all we want to do is give you the questions today, hopefully point everybody in the right direction so you know what to start thinking about. And you'll look on the screen, you'll see the agenda. So we're going to talk about these specific topics. And then again, hopefully you'll hear some ideas about what that might look like at your YMCA. So again, we're live. I know people are still joining. This will be recorded if you're just getting on now. So we're going to post this in multiple different areas. On our Campfire Conference Facebook page, you'll see some of this link as well. Link has been a great resource for anybody who's trying to get through this together. So we're going to get started. There's the agenda, and we're going to move on to topic number one, which is facility use. So we're going to break this into two different areas, your specific YMCA branch and then any offsite location that you might use. So when we think about your YMCA branch, if you host camp out of that branch, we have to start thinking about it when your branch opens back up, which some of them are going to start doing next month, hopefully. What sort of capacity limits are you going to have? Are you opening up in different phases? Are there different areas that you're going to be using in that branch? And then when we do that, we have to consider our membership base. So what areas are going to be currently used? On the wellness floor, in the group X rooms, areas that you might sometimes share during a camp day. We have to think about how that's going to look moving forward. So if your branch has a capacity limit, how does your camp affect that? So let's just make up a number and say you can only have 100 people in your building at a time, and 50 of those happen to be your summer campers. So how are we managing those other 50 at your branch? That's something that you're going to start wanting to have conversations about. Another thing that's come up a few times in conversations I've had is specialty camps. So sometimes people will offer half-day specialty camps in addition to a longer traditional day of camp. Now, the question would be are the specialty camps, which are usually lower in numbers, are those taking up space that maybe you might need for your traditional day camp? And when I say space, I'm talking about actual physical space in the building. So those are just some questions to consider as we look at how many people can you actually put into your building, and what are those limits going to be based on state regulations or CDC or other recommendations. And then the last one, when we think about your space, and this could go for any place that you're using, is a large gathering. So I know currently there's the recommendations out there that a gathering shouldn't have more than 10 people in it. If during different phases of reopening, if that gets lifted to even 50, which it was when we were closing things, now we have to start thinking about what does that look like. So think about the classrooms that you might use, or again, the corners of the building that you might fit into. And if the limit is still 10, we probably can't have 25 people in that room. Or if the limit is 50, I think about how many people go into a gymnasium, for example, for maybe to do an opening ceremony where you have over 100 campers in there singing songs and getting pumped up for the camp day. But if we now have a limit of 50, for example, is that an adjustment you're going to have to make? So those are some things to think about for your actual YMCA branch. So now let's move on to the offsite location. So a lot of us partner with different places outside of our own buildings, whether it's a school, a church, community center. There's lots of them out there, and they're traditionally great partners to have, and it's a great way that we can grow outside of our four walls as well. So now we have to ask if those places are going to be open. So if you haven't done so already, I would recommend start reaching out to some of those partners just to touch base, just to check in to say, hey, we're still interested in having camp there. Just make sure you guys are still interested in having us there. And during this time, it might be helpful to share some of the practices. For anybody who was on our last call talking about emergency childcare, we mentioned a lot of new best practices, which we're going to get to in a couple seconds as well. Just to keep our kids and staff safe and healthy. So it might be in your benefit to start, as you're reaching out to your partners for the summer, to already tell them, to get ahead of it and tell them some of the things you're doing so they feel good about the space that they might be renting you during the summer, because they probably have some concerns as well. So that's in the next bullet point there. Do these buildings have new policies that they now have to follow, or different restrictions? Do you have to update a contract if you have a contract with any of these places? Because we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of their policies, but they're all, at the end of the day, we want them to all align. So these are all things to kind of start thinking about with the spaces that you use outside of your own YMCA. And another point to think about is, will you need additional space? So let's go back to the branch example. If your branch hosts 200 kids at summer camp, and now you have capacity limits, and you have to cut that down to 100 just to make up a number, cut it in half. Where are those other 100 kids going to go? And now you might be forced to start looking outside of your walls. If that's something you have not done traditionally, or don't have a lot of experience, then we'd be more than willing to help in that process. But if you do have other partners out there, schools, churches, if they're willing to open up their doors, it might be something we have to consider just for capacity, so we can still properly serve the community and all the kids. We would hate to turn away our returning campers because they missed it, they didn't get into a spot, and we have waiting lists. So if we think that's going to be happening in your area, it might be an idea to start looking for additional sites. So we're going to pause there and get a chance to see if there's any comments or questions. Julie, if you want to take over this section and help field the crowd.
Sure. So it looks like here there's not any questions in the chat box quite yet. So just as a reminder, as we're going through each of these sections here, if you have any questions or comments or best practices that you're adopting in your Y that you'd like to share with others, please feel free to comment below and we will answer those questions in that slide. But it looks like here there's not any comments for this section of the presentation.
So as I mentioned a couple times in the beginning, if you're coming in late, this will be recorded, so you'll be able to view anything afterwards. And then in addition, our goal here is to just kind of put these questions out there for everyone to start thinking about, hopefully point everyone in the right direction, because we've all agreed that camp's going to look different. So as we're moving forward, we want to try to get you to think about these questions, but there will be some more resources coming out later in the next couple of weeks, both from the YMCA of the USA. So keep on the lookout that A lot of these questions you might not have the answer to, so we recommend you kind of going back to either the people around your Y, or the leaders around your Y, or any other colleagues, and then talk about how they're managing through this. But then also know that there will be some more resources coming out in the future. So if there's no other questions on facilities, we're going to move on to the next thing, which I alluded to in the previous slide, was the safe environment. So again, anybody who was on our previous call where we talked about emergency childcare, we talked about each of these areas, about some of the new policies that we put into place while we're running camp during these the school closures. And so I'm going to touch on these a little bit. Again, it might be a repeat for anybody who's been on the call, but these are some new things that a lot of people are currently putting into place to make sure that our camps are safe and healthy. A lot of us are doing curbside drop-off, and what that does is limits the amount of parents or adults that are coming into your building, which could be potentially spreading some new germs. So if we keep them outside doing curbside, that's just, again, less traffic coming through your actual door. Camper and staff health checks. We've been taking temperatures of everybody every day. That includes camper and staff, to make sure that they're at a healthy temperature. We've been doing surveys with our parents to make sure that things are also being done at home, that they haven't been exposed to anything, and that the people in their house are also healthy, so they're not potentially transmitting any of those new germs. And we've all limited our group size, so our groups are now 10. I know this might be a change for summer camp, but we might have to start asking this question. If some of these things are still in place in the next month, when we start in June, or earlier, depending on what part of the country you're in, is your group size now going to be 10? And so if your group size is 10, do you have enough space to have a group of 10 in different rooms or different parts of your building? Because we don't know if those group sizes are going to be increased or not, or if it's still going to be the recommendation from the CDC to keep them smaller. 6-foot social distancing has obviously been a big one everywhere, not just in our world of YMCA. But is this going to continue? So again, some of these things we don't have answers on, but it's something we want to plan ahead just in case it does. So when we have meals currently, our kids are all at different tables. And when we're doing different projects, everyone has 6 feet in between them, which is, again, the opposite of everything we try to do in summer camp, where we build community and teamwork, and we have everybody just making friends together. But this might be something, again, it's a change we might have to adapt to, just given the situation. And if you have not started thinking about that, again, just start walking around the space that you would typically use for summer camp and think how that might have to look differently if you have to maintain a 6-foot distance between most of your kids. And then daily deep cleans of supplies and surfaces. So again, this is something we're all doing now currently if you're running camps, but we're going to have to step this up and continue in the summer, where we're just constantly wiping down everything. So everything that somebody touches, we wipe it down, whether it's a table, a door, a light switch. If you've got any sort of toys or blocks or anything like that that the kids are using, we got to wipe those down. And so this is now something you're going to have to think about for summer camp. How do you build that into your schedule? Is there one staff who's dedicated into doing this? Is it a group effort where the kids can help wipe things down? Or is it just something where you have to add a couple extra minutes into every activity because they're going to need some additional cleaning? So again, these are some of the slides. I'd be happy to talk afterwards. If anyone has any questions, you'll get all of our contacts about if you're not currently running an emergency camp, this might look new to you. So if you, these are some of the things we want everybody to start thinking about as we prepare. So Julie,
Yes.
Can we see anything?
Yes. So a lot of our comments right now are really geared around where people are coming in from, and it's all over the United States, which we're really happy to have each of you also on the call. We're seeing a lot of comments around people are feeling a little bit more comfortable as they're navigating the 10 groups or groups of 10. So we're getting a little bit more familiarity with that, which is great to hear as we are pivoting and learning as we go. And then we also have a question here. Somebody had watched the video, the last week's video, and wanted to know exactly where on link we'll be posting this recording. And so we will comment on that at the end of the slideshow. There's lots of resources on link where you can find that, and it's be on the COVID-19 page, but we will go more in depth with that at the end of the slideshow so you get those notes.
Yeah, we've got a lot of states represented right now. I know we have people in Hawaii, Washington, California, New York, Texas, Florida, Ohio. We've got the whole country represented. So we're excited to have everybody together. And I know that we're all here because we care about camp. We want to make sure we're providing the best opportunity possible for our families. And again, if you're not currently working day to day with any sort of emergency childcare, some of the things that we are talking about might be new for you. So hopefully you can start planning and as we mentioned at the top, get this contingency plan in place.
Great. We have one more question before we go to the next slide. Benjamin David wants to know how camps are structuring their lunch times, keeping within those groups of 10 and how they're spacing out and using space when it comes to indoor and outdoor space for lunch.
I know some of the ideas I've heard so far is again, we have to think about capacity. So how many kids are actually coming? So if you've got 200 kids, that's going to be a big challenge. When we're talking about specifically about day camp, not resident camp where they used to come together, it comes down to just staggering lunch times. So whatever space you might usually use, you might have to start lunch a little bit earlier in the day so that there's smaller group sizes in that area, and then you just rotate them through and maybe have a shorter lunch. I know sometimes a lot of people block off 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes even for lunch, just because we like to allow socialization. We like to let kids start hanging out. But we might have to limit some of that just in terms to get them all squeezed in a couple hour block time. And again, depending on if you use tables or if you eat outside, it's just a matter of spreading them out and giving every kid their 6-foot space, if that is still going to be a policy and by the time we get to camp.
Great. We have one more question before we move on to the next topic. TJ Johnson has asked the question, do you suggest campers wearing masks when they come to camp? There is some concern about can that cause fear or anxiety within our campers? And so is the best practice to focus on hygiene and washing and or is most camps using masks for children as well as staff?
Yeah, I think that we've moved past the fear and anxiety part. I think that at least in most parts of the country, masks have become acceptable. The CDC did reverse their decision on that. Originally, they said don't wear masks unless you're sick, but then they said this might be a better way to help prevent the spread of disease. So I know all of our staff right now are currently wearing masks. I don't know if that's going to continue in the summer. We actually have not a lot, but there's a handful of kids that wear masks as well because their parents want them to. So I think it's one of those weird shifts in our culture where it's going to be accepted. And I don't think anyone's going to look and think it's unsafe because people are wearing masks. I think if anything, at least from a lot of parents' perspectives, they might appreciate seeing that because they know that at least we're doing everything we can to limit any sort of spread of disease for terms.
Great. Thank you. I think that's all the questions for this section.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rhonda Elmore with the YMCA of Greater Birmingham, and just going to talk a little bit about programming and just some things and questions that you should be asking yourself. As someone who's been doing camp for over 25 years, I think this is probably going to be some of our most challenging things to do around programming because we're used to campers being able to get close, play games where they may have to, tag each other. And so we're really going to have to get creative around programming this summer if your health guidelines still require you to have no more than or have 6 feet between children. So some things to think about around activity supplies is, will you be able to allow your campers to share materials? We're accustomed to, sharing everything in camp from sports equipment to crayons to markers. And so if you're doing emergency care right now, you're finding that some of your health departments or health guidelines may be requiring you to have individual supplies for each child. And our YMCA budgets usually don't allow for that. So some things to think about is, will you be allowed to share materials, but also think about what kind of materials that you could use to throw away when they're finished. So if you're painting, can you paint with Q-tips or can you use marshmallows to paint? Like, think of ways that you can do different projects with the campers with supplies that can just be thrown away afterwards. And then there's just less cleaning that we have to do. Also, with a lot of YMCAs closed right now, we're probably going to see us asked in the camping world and other programs as well to maybe decrease our program supplies. So making sure you're talking to whomever you need to talk to in your association about your supply budget. Will it be decreased? Do you still have the same amount of money to spend, even though you probably will have decreased children. And then the last thing around activities, with so many of our campers now out of school for the rest of the school year, how can our camps provide support in the area of academics? Some camps may already do some things around academics and some may not. So a good thing to do is to partner with your local schools that maybe you already partner with after school, and see how your camp program can help support them and what they're doing in the summer, even if it's just reading for 30 minutes every day. But anything that we can do to help prevent that summer slide in camp, I really think that that's going to be important. Another thing that you need to be thinking about is if your camp goes on field trips, lots of different questions. One, are those destinations still going to be open? Most of the places we go on field trips attract large groups. So if they're open, are they going to allow you to bring your large group, or maybe consider bringing them in smaller groups each time that they come? So instead of taking half your camp one day, maybe you take a little bit each day. Transportation, if we have to maintain 6-foot social distancing, how do we transport kids? Our state guidelines right now, where I'm at in Alabama, we're not allowed to put children on a bus under our health orders. So those are things you'll need to start thinking about, or making sure you have that information. And then social distancing is going to affect your bus capacity. You could spread them out on a 72 passenger bus, but you still would not get as many children as normal. And the other thing that you really need to make sure if you are going on field trips is the question you need to be asking the destination, the vendor you're using, is what are their protocols? What are they doing to ensure that their cleaning is done and being followed? How are they sanitizing? How are they disinfecting? What protocols have they put in place to keep the people who come into their building safe? So those are just some things around field trips. And then swimming. Some Ys may transport campers from a school site, maybe to a Y or to a public pool. So that transportation piece may affect swimming this summer. And then can we even do, if you do swim instruction, like what does that look like with social distancing? I think swimming in general as a YMCA is one of those things we really don't have an answer to yet. And I think it's all going to be up to local and state guidelines, whether pools are allowed to be open. But just some things you need to think about, because if you're going to lose your swim time, how can you get them active in other water activities, or what are you going to put in place of those activities? At our camp, Gaga Ball, huge, popular activity. We're not going to be able to play it this summer. Challenge your staff and your campers, even when camp starts, or use your emergency care children to help work through this. Is like, how do we reinvent traditional camp games that we can play and still fun, but still are safe with that 6-foot social distancing? So we hope that we can, through Link, be able to share resources with everybody. So as you're developing resources, we really want to encourage us to share all that on Link, because we're all in this together. And I think a network of activities is going to be really important for this summer. I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a minute and talk to Julie if there's any questions in the chat box.
Yes, we have a couple questions that have come in. William Burks has asked if camps are looking at staggering check-in and check-out time for spacing and cleaning. So I don't know, Chuck or Rhonda, if you've had any thoughts on that. I have not had that conversation yet, but that's a really good idea.
That's actually a suggestion. It wasn't a requirement, but our local health department has in their guidelines. It's more geared towards daycare centers. But I definitely think if you have a large camp, that you may want to look at how that might look for your camp. And, you have to think about traffic patterns at your Y, how many kids you might have. And then also, because if you have a lot coming in at one time, you have to, if we're in a small groups of 10, then you have to be able to get them to that space where they need to be, so we don't get into large group settings. So that's going to be a challenge if that's something that you do. And if anyone does do that or is doing that now in emergency care, please share in the chat box how that's working for you guys.
Great. Our next question that we have is from the Bidenwood YMCA, and they have asked, has anyone been looking into borrowing, renting, or investing in a fogger for hand sanitizing high traffic areas?
We have not, but one of our school districts that we run camp in has already told us that they're going to bring one of theirs to our school site. And so their custodian will be doing that at our school site. So if you're in a school, I would definitely talk to the school administration. They may have one of those already in their school district, and see how you can maybe have that brought to the school that you're doing your camp in. And I would also go ahead and start that conversation with whomever is in charge of purchasing supplies for your association, because the cleaning and the high touch areas is going to be something that's going to have to be done constant throughout the summer.
To follow, I don't know if Beth from the Suncoast YMCA is on the call at all, but she had mentioned recently that their Y bought a couple of those machines that can just sanitize everything quickly. So they kind of built that in their schedule. They are a little bit expensive, but you know, as one group leaves a building, or if they go outside for a while, they'll just turn the machine on and it takes care of everything.
Great. And we have one more question before we move on to the next topic. And this is from Matt Pickett. And it's a question in regards to emergency childcare, but it'll be definitely transferable when it comes to day camp. It says, for those of you that are running emergency childcare camp, are you allowing your campers to have free play? And if so, are they allowed to use the same toys? How are you letting and educating the kids know what is and is not appropriate?
So what we're currently doing, and Chuck or Julie, if y'all want to share from your Ys, is they are having some free play, but they have to use their own. So each group right now, each child has like their own bag of Legos or bag of manipulatives. We're not sharing those type of activities. But if two kids want to throw the football back and forth, our protocol on that is we clean the football first. We make both children wash their hands. And then there's, the supervision piece of while they're throwing it back, remind them not to touch their face. And then as soon as they're finished, we clean the ball that they're using and we make them wash their hands. So, it's going to get harder when we get into summer camp and we may have more children and sharing equipment, because our budgets just don't allow us to purchase something for every child to use at one time. And so I think that's where you're going to have to get creative. If you've got, if your child watch, learn and play programs aren't operating when camp starts, what do they have in those rooms that maybe we could use in camp? But the key is going to be having extra staff on hand that can come in behind a group and clean any equipment or supplies that have been used that need to be used by the next group.
And also that, if we do end up having smaller ratios, whereas a counselor has 9 kids in the group versus maybe what you've done in the past, 12, 15, up to 20 maybe or more, I think it'll be a lot easier to manage those groups and have those conversations with the kids versus having 20 kids running around. I do want to add one more idea. Rhonda mentioned about sharing supplies. One of the ideas I heard from someone in our Y was putting out there sort of like a supply list, like a teacher would do before school, with basic things like, can you provide we hate to have parents have extra costs, but can they send their child with their own box of crayons, pair of scissors, or thing of glue or something like that, inexpensive items. That way we know that we could label it as that child's and they would be using it all week or all summer if they came. And again, it might be a couple extra dollars to the parents, or maybe we purchase those in advance and allow the parents to buy them from us as part of an add-on. But it's just another little step that would reassure people that we're not just constantly sharing materials if the state of things still say that is not good.
I know one thing that we were talking about is there's so many different churches and philanthropy groups that are wanting to help. And so even just doing a supply drive at your Y, or, getting your community involved where people can purchase glue and scissors, some of the consumable stuff. And that way you can create little kits for each child. And if you go and watch our call from last week, we had even some visual pictures that could help show how you can easily set up individual supplies for each child.
Great. Before we move on, we've had lots of great discussion around Ys that are using the foggers. They are very saying great things about how it's providing that safe, secure environment, also with parent education, letting them know what they're doing to sanitize their Ys, and providing that staff that sense of cleanliness and that they're doing the right thing as they're working within the trenches. So great information around foggers. If you're looking into purchasing one of those, those Ys are saying great things about them.
So the next topic, and I think this is probably another one that a lot of us are thinking about and wondering how to accomplish getting staffed for summer camp. Summer camp starts at various different times throughout the country. I know here in Birmingham and Alabama, we're going to start in about 5 weeks. So and it's time to get that ball rolling. So some things around hiring. You probably may have already reached out to your returning counselors and maybe already have even returning staff hired. But I would encourage you to go back to some of that returning staff that maybe said, no, I'm not going to work this summer. I'm doing an internship or I have to take classes. Because a lot of colleges now for the summer are doing online only. So that may free them up to be able to come back to work. And I think this summer more than ever, it's going to be so crucial that we have as much returning staff as possible that really already understand our policies and our guidelines that can easily come into camp and work well with this transition versus a brand new counselor who's just going to need some additional training with that and with very limited training time that we're going to have this summer, especially person face to face. If you're doing group interviews, obviously using a format like Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, but being able to schedule group interviews, I think you can still do that. I know Kim Green from Jacksonville shared a couple weeks ago how they were doing themed group interviews, and I just thought that was a wonderful idea. But you're still going to need to hire staff, so making sure that you have some kind of platform that's available to you to interview staff. Other things you may want to consider depending on your state and how you do background checks, but maybe anticipate delays. So if you're having to do fingerprints and they have to be sent to the state, those may get delayed because they may not have the staff working in their offices right now. So if you haven't already, now's a good time to talk to your HR director about how you're going to handle those types of things if you're licensed and all the licensing requirements that come for hiring staff. What's the plan if you can't get those back before camp starts? Honestly, you're going to need to hire for a lower ratio. I think we're all now, if you're doing emergency care, you're basically in a 1-to-9 ratio. And so making sure that you're hiring staff for a 1-to-9 ratio, but also hiring extra staff because staff who are working in emergency care right now, they're tired already because it is a long day, even if you're just working 6 hours because of the keeping the social distancing. I think that part is a very hard part for our staff. So having extra staff on hand to give breaks more often during the day, maybe having shorter schedules during the day just to keep staff morale up, I think is going to be important. So if you're able to hire additional staff, I would definitely encourage you to look at what that need might be. Also around training, obviously, right now our guidelines say it's going to be a little different maybe throughout the country, but small group sizes. So we can't bring 40 counselors in a room to do training. So you need to think about how can you do some small group size trainings. I know a couple of weeks ago, someone from Mississippi said they were going to bring like all their 5 and 6-year-old counselors together to the Y to train. And then they were going to bring their next age group. So you're maybe bringing 3 to 4 counselors in at a time. Obviously, you want to put a lot of focus on your new hires in the small group settings. There's just something to be said about a face-to-face training versus a virtual training or sending someone an online webinar to watch. You don't really understand or know what kind of reaction they're getting from it, or if they're even getting anything from the training, because everybody learns differently. Hopefully you guys have already heard that Redwoods has made all of their online camp training free to all YMCAs, and there's a post and link about it. And so that's a really great resource. If you're not a Redwoods Y, we used to be one here in Birmingham, and there are just wonderful trainings that are available that cover a lot of different risk topics. So definitely look and take advantage of that. Also, virtual training. I mean, we're going to have to use Zoom, Google Hangout, maybe Facebook groups to do some virtual training. And I know you're going to have to make it fun. I think the biggest thing that it'll be a missed opportunity for us if we don't do it right is bringing that camp culture to training, because everything starts with training, right? So how do we make a virtual training feel like we're all in a room together singing songs and acting silly? And how do we just bring that element of fun? So are you singing songs? Are you playing games? What creative ways can you do your training virtually that still give that feel and that culture and that spirit of camp? Because we don't want that to get lost in training because it won't show up at camp the first day if they don't feel it in training. Also, consider furlough dates versus your camp start date. So, a lot of our part-time staff are currently furloughed. So making sure that we have time to bring them back. You may want to check with your HR to see if they will go ahead and allow you to contact those furloughed staff that were maybe working in another department or after school, but now they're furloughed, but they'd planned to work camp, to contact them to see if you can just confirm they're still planning to come back to camp. I know we did that here in Birmingham this week, and so far 100% of our staff are ready to come back to work. And so that just makes me so excited to know that they're that committed. And then look at your camp start date. So you've got to make sure you've got enough time to bring staff back on, get staff on payroll, get that training done, and then launch your first day at camp. So I will go ahead and stop there and let Julie look in the chat box.
Sure. We have a couple of questions that have come through. Emily Renata has asked a question, looking at everything that has been suggested, I'm curious of how otherwise are covering the added costs for cleaning, staff, and supplies. We talked a little bit about that as far as finding funding partners, but does anybody else have any other strategies around the cleaning costs that are expected to operate in this type of environment?
In Birmingham, it's an association effort. And so we're doing that cost at an association level. And so we're just telling them what we need. And we have a team that's doing nothing but working on finding the cleaning supplies, because I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is actually finding the things we need, because as the country starts to reopen over the next month, not only the Y, but everyone's going to be looking for those cleaning supplies. So for us, we're just committed. So whatever the cost is, now we have secured some foundation grants over the last month to help cover the cost of some things that we're doing. But I think it's just, for now, for us, the cost of doing business that we're going to have to do to make sure that we can be open.
Great. And the next question comes from Stuart Weinberg, and he's asking what types of PPEs is everyone using when they're performing health screen check-ins? I know most of us are using masks for staff and also gloves. So I don't know, Chuck or Rhonda, if you're using any other PPEs, but I know majority of us are using those two PPEs.
Masks, gloves, yeah, and then checking the temperatures with a touchless thermometer. And then again, after, this is another step that we've had to add, but we've wiped down everything in between every single family. So if a parent signs in with a pen, we wipe that pen down before the next parent touches it.
Great. I know here in Greenville, we've also incorporated tablets for check-in. I don't know if any of you guys have access to that. So then you wouldn't give it to the parents, just the staff person, so you're kind of eliminating those germs. So if you have the access to a tablet or an electronic sign-in system, that will also help with the transfer and making sure everyone is safe.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if your YMCA uses DAXCO, then I would definitely check with your DAXCO rep about using the attendance tracker. You can do it through a Kindle, which is pretty, $40, $50. So it would be cheaper to probably do that than to continue to buy Clorox wipes, so wipe everything down every time. So if you're on DAXCO, I would definitely encourage you to check into the attendance tracker to do the mobile check-in and check out.
Great. We'll move on to our next question by Ebony Burnett, and she has asked if anyone's had any pushback from licensing or new requirements from their state licensing organizations.
We are not required to be licensed here in Alabama, so I might pitch that back to you or Chuck if y'all have any feedback.
It's state by state right now, depending on your licensing agency. A lot of them have granted exceptions and exemptions during this time. So it might be worth a conversation to say, make sure we can still run our program as we know it. And then I think a lot of them are still, they're waiting for guidance as to what their requirements are going to be. So I think unfortunately it's going to be state by state. But I think just letting them know that we're doing this, here's the steps we're following. Hopefully that'd be enough to keep them happy.
And last question before we move on to the next is by Sandra Smith. She's having a hard time finding masks for kids. So if anyone has any suggestions on where to find those, She would appreciate that. I know right now we're making like handmade masks and we're getting a lot of donations for those. So we're using those masks and making them in adult and children's sizes. So I don't know if anyone else is having
Yeah,
success finding
we have a
those.
lot of our volunteers who have an interest in sewing,
Yeah.
and they've been mass producing them recently because there's been a lot of interest. So it's cute to see, but there's been a couple little old ladies that'll come in once a week and drop off a big pile of them for the YMCA. We've been giving them money for supplies, but that, as far as the CDC recommends, again, we're not going to be able to get the hospital grade ones. So any sort of protective thing we can put on our face will serve its purpose, at least for staff and kids.
Great. And I think that's it for this section for the chat box.
Great. I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
All right, the fun one, but the financial impact. I'm sure that many people have already been having these conversations, especially with our actual YMCA's closing, because there's a much bigger picture here than just summer camp. But what we want to do is really address some of these things that we all need to start thinking about if you haven't already. And if you haven't, or these are conversations maybe to have with your supervisor, just to be upfront about what might be different than was originally budgeted, because we would hate to expect one thing and then have it even worse from a financial perspective, because we want to do everything possible right now to make sure our Ys can get out of this and survive. And if your Y is not one who's thriving financially, even before this virus, then you're going to have to make some tough decisions as well. So a couple of things to consider is let's start with revenue, the money coming in. So do we expect less campers? This could be for two different reasons. And the second one's listed below, but are we going to have less people actually enroll for camp because there's still some fear out there? Because people don't want to put their kids in an environment that could be potentially seen as risky. Is this, or maybe it's just safer to stay at home? So whereas in the past you might have been bursted at the seams for campers, some areas you might not be as lucky, and we might be looking at less enrollment than in the past. And then some of that might be due to the second bullet point, which is space. So again, if you've come to the conclusion that you can only have 50 kids in your building this time, and you're used to having 100, that's 50 less kids a week that would be paying a weekly fee. That money, it won't be coming into your YMCA. So that's something that you need to start planning ahead and thinking about what are those actual dollars going to look like, and putting some true numbers to that. The next one is about lowering our fees. So this is a conversation a lot of people have. Some people have already made this decision. So as Rhonda talked about earlier, since camp is going to look different, and if you're not going on field trips anymore, or if you won't be swimming anymore, or if you have to limit certain things, is it worth lowering your fee? I mean, if you're not providing the same service to the parents as years past, can you still charge them the same rate? That's just a question you might have to ask and have some discussions with your leaders as well, to figure out if we're going to charge the same, how do we make sure that the programming is enhanced at a lower, to make sure that we're making up for what the kids might be missing. And then the final thing with revenue is financial assistance and scholarships. We know that there's a lot of people right now that are out of work, and hopefully they're going to slowly start getting back to work, but their income has took a hit in this process. So it's likely that we'll see an increase in applications for parents who need financial assistance. So what that would do is lower, again, the amount of revenue coming in, because if they're not paying the full weekly amount, that's less money that we're going to be making. So those are all things to kind of think about, just in terms of how much revenue we can realistically expect this summer. And if it's going to be lower, then those are things we got to start figuring out now and making some determinations. And then we'll look at the expenses. So these are things that are within our control for the most part. So we're going to have to think about how this is going to affect our bottom line as well. So payroll, if you're used to a 1 to 10 or 1 to 15 or 1 to 20 ratio, and now we're going to 1 to 10, 9 or 10, you're going to need more staff. So when you have more staff, there's going to be more payroll hours. So that's something you might have to look at your budget, make sure that one, you can afford it, but two, that you're planning ahead, that you're not getting phone calls from the accounting department or saying, why is the payroll out of control? Do you have to limit program supply spending? So this is one of those ones that kind of wraps up a few of the other things we talked about. So if we're having less campers, if we're lowering our rates, and if we're having other increased expenses, this is one of those areas where we might have to be creative with, where we might not be able to spend as much as we were normally. Now, maybe you've budgeted for things like field trips, and if you're going to cut those, and you can just kind of shift this money into some program supplies, and that's great. But if you have to make harder decisions based on the financial status of your Y, you might have to be creative again with what kind of money you're spending on program supplies. So to kind of think about what are you used to spending per child? Do you have a dollar? Is it $1 per child, $5 per child, whatever those numbers are, $10? You might have to make some cuts in that department as well. And then this was brought up in a previous comment already, but cleaning supplies. That's something that we're all going to have to buy more of, and a lot more of, because we're cleaning nonstop now versus maybe just a couple times a day or once a week. But that's something where, again, if you don't have the budget to increase this, you might have to take it away from something else. So your program supplies might go down a little bit because you need to spend more money on cleaning supplies. Again, if you can get donations for any of these things, that's obviously a great solution to prevent you from having to spend them yourselves. And then this last one is just an interesting one to think about for t-shirts. So every camp that I know of, they do it completely differently. A lot of camps like to give out a t-shirt for their kid, and it's a pretty exciting thing, and because they wear them all year round. Now I've talked to some people who give as many as 5 t-shirts to their campers every year. So they have one every day. Same with staff. Now that's a lot of t-shirts, and some of you are probably wondering how that's possible, but that's just the tradition that some Ys have. Some people might do 2 or anywhere in between. But the only reason I point that out is because it's something to start thinking about. Is that a cost that we can even afford this year? Do we have to cut it down to 1 t-shirt? If we have returning staff, maybe they don't need as many t-shirts. One of the conversations that my Y was having today is usually we print on both sides. So we have a front graphic and a back graphic, but that's an increased cost. So we usually pay a little bit more to have printing on both front and back. So now we can just print it on one side and save a cost there. But those are all kind of little decisions that some of you might be up against, because these are all the questions we want you to start thinking about, because a lot of us are in a situation where every dollar counts right now. And if you can do your part with summer camp and saving on some of these, especially looking at some of the revenue that might not be there, we just want you to start thinking about that. We'll open up to any comments or questions that we've got about the financial impact of this.
Sure, we have 2 questions that have come in. The first one from Nicholas McBean is asking, how are people registering kids with all of the paperwork that's required? So I'm assuming that this Y does not have access to online registration. So I think just off the top of my head, and I'll switch it over to Rhonda and Chuck, mail could be a possibility, and or taking registrations, finding a process if you don't do that currently over the phone. Can be also a possibility as well too. So Rhonda and Chuck, do you have any other strategies as far if branches or Ys do not have access to an online portal for registration?
Well, whether you have access to online registration, we still have access to online interactions. So if you have an email base or a website or social media that you can post things to, and then parents can download it, that would give them a chance to print it out at home and then bring it back in. Or if your Y is able to open up any sort of office hours where, on Monday from 10 to 12, you can bring in your registration forms. Maybe because the Y is closed. It's just another idea to give parents that opportunity or option if it's not all online. And then in terms of who's managing that registration, that just kind of comes down to cross-training the people that are still active and making sure that everybody can kind of chip in and help with that registration process if it's a manual process.
Great, thank you. We did have a question from Dustin Williams asking about the engagement since emergency childcare numbers have been pretty low across the movement. Is the anticipation for the low numbers going to be the same for summer camp? And Hope Thompson answered that question. I think she did a great job in saying that they surveyed their past camp families to kind of get a gauge of what they're expecting. And the response is that the parents are saying they really trust the Y and trusting the resources and training and strategies they're putting in place to keep their kids safe. So I think that's a great strategy to keep in mind if you have not thought about surveying to kind of get a gauge of what your anticipation might be, whether you might have already oversold your camps based on branch capacity and or interest, and or is there some additional recruitment that might need to happen. So even though we're not running traditional programs, survey is a great strategy to use on expectations.
And we're also hoping, again, this will be state by state, but as different states start lifting their stay-at-home orders, we're hoping that that'll get people back to work. And then as a sense of normalcy, they'll obviously need a place to take their kid. And we'll talk about in the next slide how we want to make sure we're communicating that. Again, hope is not the best strategy right now, but we are trying to stay optimistic that as people return to work, the numbers will slowly start to increase.
And that's the last question for this section.
So let's talk about parent communication. I think this is perfect transition here. If in fact you are going to be open for summer, we do want to let parents know. We want to get out ahead of this to start highlighting some of our positive things. We want to make sure that we're there for them. They know that we're there for them. As Julie mentioned, that we're a trusted place in this community. So a lot of our Ys have great reputations. So before you start getting bombarded with questions and emails and phone calls, might as well let them know. And you might not have all the answers, so that's where it gets a little tricky. For those that have seen, it was on link, but you can also find it on YouTube from Camp Widgewagon. I believe that's in Tennessee. They just put out a video recently that kind of answers this question. But again, the goal here is to try to put parents at ease that we will be here for you. We don't have all the answers right now, but as we get them, they're coming. So letting them know now. And then this is the big one too. We want to make sure that we're telling them all these things that we're doing. So everything that we have either already put into place or plan to put into place, we want to share that, so that they feel comfortable that we're keeping their kids safe and that we're keeping the environment safe. So whatever it is you have that you're doing, that's got to be part of your messaging. And we're talking about here highlighting the positives. This is the big one here. So the more we can get out there to not just our parents, community stakeholders, anybody, partners, telling them like these are all the things that we're doing. We want them to know that we're taking this seriously, and it's not going to be an afterthought where we're reacting to it, that we're being proactive and already putting these things into place. And then the last thing, there's going to be some changes, as we mentioned. And if, for example, your parents are used to field trips and swimming and all these great things that usually define what summer camp is and have made us popular over the years, and if those don't exist anymore, we don't want to necessarily focus on those at all. And so as you and your team start to get creative with how you're going to supplement some of that programming with some new creative ideas, we might just have to lift up some of the things that you're already doing that are special and fun for the kids, and make sure that those are front and center, so that we're not having them focus on things we're not doing anymore, but that we're telling them all the great experiences that their kids are still going to have. So I just want to talk, again, this is a quick one here, but this is another area that there will be some more information coming out from YUSA soon, some messaging. If you don't have a big marketing team that can help with this, we also have service delivery YMCAs that are more than willing to help. If you don't know what that is, go on link and look for the little truck. But it's a group of YMCAs that are experts in some of these areas, marketing one of them. So if we can help all of your Ys with some ways to get this out there publicly, to get ahead of it, so that we're not waiting until we have a parent orientation 2 days before summer camp to answer all these questions.
And Chuck, if I could just add a few things. I know you mentioned Widgewagon, but a lot of us are used to having those big parent meetings. So go ahead and start planning now. what that's going to look like for your Ys. And also think about how you're going to communicate to families if you need to send home a boo-boo note or a parent communication form or whatever type of documentation forms you send home. How can we do that differently just to limit that interaction in the car pickup line, and limit your staff's interaction with families to some degree, to keep everyone safe. So think about how can you do that electronically or digitally to make sure that we're still communicating with parents, but also maybe cutting down on some of the paper and just that transactional stuff that usually happens in those carpool lines.
So any other comments that have come in from that? Julie, did you see anything? Or?
Yes, so we're getting quite a few comments about Sue's survey and wanting to get access to that. So we will post the link to her survey so you all can use that as a template and adjust to your Ys needs to see what the interest is for summer camp. So thank you, Sue, for sharing those resources. And we also got a question from Nick Boggs, and he is in Michigan, and he's currently underneath stay-at-home order. And he is curious to hear from otherwise, once that has lifted, have they seen an increase in need for childcare, or has it pretty much stayed where it's been? In South Carolina, ours has not been lifted. Ours will be lifted on Friday, just a little bit. And so we've gotten a couple calls, but not a huge influx like we anticipated it to be. And I know that will be different state by state. So I don't know if Rhonda or Chuck, you have any other comments to add to that.
Anybody from Georgia on the call? I think Georgia's going to be opening up on Monday, so yep. They might start seeing anything.
Yeah, we're still under current health orders through the 30th here in Alabama. So unfortunately, but they did talk about some of our different task force recommendations. And as soon as those recommendations were made public, we saw an uptick in parents inquiring about summer day camp.
Great. Thank you. And I think that is all the messages in the chat box. So I will end this presentation with any other questions that you might all have. We have a couple more minutes, about 3 more minutes on the call. We want to be sensitive to your time. So please message below if you have any other comments. As mentioned below, or as mentioned before, we will post this, it'll be recorded. We'll post it on link. So if there are some things that you missed or you join the call later, we'll be posting those. You'll have full access to the full presentation. And my information, Rhonda and Chuck's information is included in this. So feel free, as we are all one big camp family, to reach out to us as we're willing to support in any areas that we can. We might not know the answers, but we might be able to connect you or help you brainstorm in different areas. And feel free to use this community to connect with each other as you're working through. We have about 400 people registered for this call, about 300 people that made the call today. So lots of great contacts. We want to make sure that we use each other's resources as we're navigating this new normal. So I will leave it open just for a couple minutes to see if any more questions come in. But if Chuck or Rhonda, you have anything else that you want to add to the presentation, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm just going to say some final thoughts. I mean, I think that one of the things that we see kind of happening around the country in a joking way, a lot of parents are getting sick of their kids, not in a bad way, but it's a lot to be a parent and a teacher and everything else, and they're not used to that. So I think that summer camp might really be a welcome break. So I think that I would hope that a lot of parents turn to the Y as their number one option to say, my kid needs this, not just to get them out of house, but to get everything that they've been missing for the last 2 months.
Great. We do have a question that came up from Janie Trammell, and she was asking if anyone's having a hard time finding cleaning supplies. She's just has a little bit of fear of having to provide those with the demand being so high and not being able to produce that to provide a clean environment. I know for us, we're kind of working through some of our cleaning vendors. We have timelines on some of our supplies. But I also know we were on a call with Eli yesterday, and she said she found thermometers at Walmart online and was able to purchase quite a few of those. So I would definitely refer you to go back to maybe some of your typical vendors or places that you purchase for cleaning supplies to see if those have been restocked. That might not be our first sense of going to, but it looks like some of those pieces are starting to come back for purchase. So Rhonda or Chuck, do you have any other comments to add on that?
Yeah, I was going to add that if, depending on your state, if you have a strong alliance of YMCAs in your state, reach out to your state alliance executive, because there might be other YMCAs whose vendors are still able to provide them with everything that they need. So there's an opportunity to kind of work together and collaborate in the state to purchase supplies like that.
Yeah, we've been working with the YMCA purchasing group, and I know you have to be a member, so you may want to check with someone in your maybe finance or facilities department to see if your Y is a member. But they've been able to really help us find supplies. And also, I know here in Alabama, a lot of breweries are now making hand sanitizer. So a lot of businesses have kind of shifted a little bit. So you may want to check and see what options you have for that. We had our vendor that we purchased supplies from, he had someone make hand sanitizer for us. And so prior to us even shutting down or sheltering in place here in Alabama, we had already started stockpiling some of that so we would have it for the summer. But I definitely think talking with your other Ys in your state, maybe doing some bulk purchasing together, but also if you're a member of the YPG group, whoever for your association manages that, hopefully they're already talking to them, but they've been really helpful for us here to get supplies.
Great. This is a great question that came in from Sarah Noed, and I think this is something that we're all kind of trying to think through is some branch locations or Y camps are oversold already based on the homework they've done with space and capacity and 6 foot and social distancing. So wanting to know a little bit more strategies besides maybe the first enrolled to the last enrolled of getting those spaces available. I know that's a conversation we're currently having right now. We have not landed on that strategy, so I would love to hear some thoughts as well. Rhonda, you're shaking your head like you've thought through this. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we're one of those Ys that are currently oversold based on our current health guidelines. And so we have several of our branches that over the course of the last couple of years that we have just decided to not offer camp from. And so we are actually looking at how do we move camp into those locations. And, we would just look at how parents registered where they live to contact them. One of our camps, we actually provide transportation from 2 other Ys to another Y. And so one of the things that we're looking at is those kids who were going to be transported, and we would just open up at those other Ys for them to have camp. Also, like one of my school districts that we are running a camp with, we've already asked them for additional schools if needed, because we run a camp in a school and the Y in the same community, and we're oversold for both spaces based on current health orders. So I would really go ahead. I'd hate to turn away anyone for day camp this summer. We've paused our registration because we didn't want to have any more registered until we knew for sure. But I would go ahead and start reaching out to local school partners, churches. A lot of school districts, at least in our area, they're undecided if they're going to offer their own day camps this summer. And so, not everyone comes to the Y, but people may be looking towards us to be their summer care provider if their current provider doesn't offer camp. And so instead of, you could just last not to get the spot, but I would definitely encourage you to start brainstorming with your team, your execs, whomever it is in your association that can help make decisions, how you can kind of move some campers around so you can serve them. And hopefully we'll be able to serve more than 10 in a space by the time we get to summer.
Great. We have one final question in the chat box. This is a great question from Dustin Williams. And he has asked, have you heard of any trainings that YUSA will be putting forth around social distancing and new norms for camp coming up? Could be a great resource for us, especially as we turn to virtual training. I have not heard that. I have not heard that from Redwoods yet either. Chuck or Rhonda, I don't know if you've heard any differently.
I know that the YUSA is in the process of collecting all the resources as well. So I would imagine that when this document comes out, there will hopefully be something on there about that, whether it comes directly from YUSA or it's probably something that somebody around the country is going to develop. It could be the CDC or somebody like that, some state health department. I think that once we find that document, the YUSA will include that in our resources.
Great. Well, we want to thank you for your time and being with us today. We hope that we found this information helpful for you to navigate what's next and the questions that you should be thinking through and working with your branch team or your association team. As mentioned before, this is recorded. It will be on link if you've missed part of the presentation. And we just want to thank you for spending a part of your day with us today. And we hope that you have a wonderful day and stay safe and healthy out there.